Welcome to the Show Up Dad, the podcast where we explore the world of fatherhood and discover their strategies, insights, and stories that empower dads to show up for their families. I'm your host, David Mendonca, and today we have a very special guest joining us. But before we dive into today's conversation, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for their support. This episode of the Show Up Dad is brought to you by Tallman Equipment, a leading provider of high-quality tools and equipment for the power line industry. With Tallman Equipment, dads can confidently tackle any project knowing they have the right tools at their disposal. Visit tallmanequipment.com to explore their wide range of products and discover how they can help you level up your line game. Additionally, I'd like to give a special shout out to the Show Up Dad Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting fathers in their journey towards becoming the best versions of themselves. Through their workshops, resources, and community, the Show Up Dad Foundation empowers dads to show up, be present, and make a positive impact on their children's lives. To learn more about their mission and how you can get involved, visit theshowupdadfoundation.org. Now let's get back to our guest. Joining us on today's episode is Brad Baldrige, one of the nation's leading college financial experts. With over 20 years of experience, Brad has dedicated his career to helping families navigate the complex world of college planning, saving, and payment. He understands the challenges parents face when it comes to making their children's college dreams a reality without jeopardizing their finances or retirement. So whether you're a dad who's just beginning to think about college planning or someone who's already knee-deep in the process, this episode is for you. Get ready to learn from the very best as we welcome Brad Baldrige to Show Up Dad. Brad, thanks for being on our show today. We want to welcome you. And before we dive into any myths and misconceptions about college, brother, let's start with a fun question I want to ask you, okay?
All right.
If you could go back in time and give your high school self one piece of advice about college, what would it be?
Get involved.
Mm.
And I think it would, and that would be apply for high school as well. I was kind of shy and, didn't get involved as much as I could have and should have. Would have been fun, but I didn't realize what I was missing and kind of bloomed later in life.
Yeah. Well, that comes with growth, right? And maturity too, do you think?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, what I wanted to talk about, Brad, is I'm a blue collar father. Our listeners are blue collar fathers, but at the end of the day, a dad is a dad. Okay. No matter what. Right. And one of the things that I know for me, I'm having my daughter. Okay. She's 17. She's going to be graduating from school, and we didn't plan for her college at all. I'm actually pretty happy at the fact that she got exceptionally good grades. She had all AP classes, and the opportunity for her to go to college is there. But she wants to start off her own business with photography, and she wants to get involved in that route. And, both my wife and I have already saved up money for her to be able to go that route, and, with photography classes and whatever else she needs to help her be as successful as possible. But for a dad who's late in the game like that, I mean, what are we supposed to do? Like, what are some of the challenges that I'm going to be facing coming up if she chooses to go to college?
Right. Yeah. So that you're in what I would call late stage college planning, which is once you're in high school, it's really go time. You really have to figure it out, from college visits to understanding financial aid, understanding what it costs. The students are going to have to do applications for admission and maybe do ACT or SAT testing, which are college entrance exams. A lot of stuff goes on at the high school around college in many high schools. And then as parents, we have to figure out how it's all going to be paid for. Whether we like it or not, the reality is the way financial aid works is they look at mom and dad's income and assets. They also look at the student's income and assets. But any student that's younger than 24, they automatically report parents' assets, with a few exceptions, right? So if the student is married themselves, then they don't have to report mom and dad. Or if they're separate from active military, they have children of their own. There's a few ways that, they may not report mom and dad, but most families aren't going to plan. They're not going to say, I know how we're paying for college. Why don't you go get married? That's not what most parents are going to tell their 18-year-old looking for college. So in the end, they're going to look at mom and dad's income and assets and the students and base the financial aid on what they see there. So that's kind of the first step is, parents are intimately involved in the process for the typical kid that's rolling out of high school and going to college. And, they're not using that information nefariously. Occasionally we have parents that say, well, I don't want to give them all that information. It's like, well, generally the government already has it. You just have to give them permission to take it from the IRS side to the college side.
Yeah.
And they've seen it all before. It's nothing, too shocking. It's like applying for a mortgage or a lot of other things that we do, right? It's just the way it works. But in that process, if mom and dad earn a lot of money and they say, well, we just choose not to pay for college, the financial aid side of the world is going to say, well, mom and dad can afford to help, so we expect them to. And if mom and dad say, well, I don't want to, well, then typically the student's not going to go. Or the student's going to have to work, nearly full time and go to school part time or do whatever they can to do it on their own. But because mom and dad's income disqualifies the student from some of the aid that they might otherwise get. Now, if mom and dad's income is relatively low and the student is often low because they're high school kids, then you may qualify for aid and kind of go from there. But mom and dad are going to have to report that information to allow the student to be qualified. Just because you give the information to the colleges doesn't automatically mean they're sending you the bill and they expect you to pay it. They're just using it to decide how much aid the student is eligible for and how much they really should be asking mom and dad. Because, again, that's the way the system's set up. Whether we like it or not, it's assumed that it's mom and dad's responsibility to help with college. Until the student, again, turns 24, grows up, has a degree already or something like that.
Yeah. What is some of the reasons why a parent wouldn't want to give that information?
Most of the times it's privacy concerns.
Okay.
Like, well, what are they going to do with this? And if I give out the information, then they're going to send me the bill and that kind of stuff. Or, and sometimes just not willingness to participate in the student's life or something like that. But again, there's occasionally people just get nervous about, well, why do they need my taxes? And why are they, I'm not going to college. Why do they care what I do? Well, again, the reason is they look at parents and the student. So in general, because of that, mom and dad have to be actively involved in the process. And usually they are anyway, because a typical 17, 18-year-old is going to have a tough time, taking that next step into college all on their own. I mean, there's some kids out there that can and do it on their own, but they're the self-driven, very organized types of kids. And, they're relatively rare. Many other students are going to need parent involvement and help with things like school visits and filling out forms and, figuring out what they want to be when they grow up. And they also have, you also have access to school counselors at the high school and other professionals if you need them. But it is a pretty complex process these days.
Yeah, and it makes sense too as parents. I mean, you're the primary caretaker of that child, right? I mean, young adult. Why not get you involved? That way the student understands what is actually taking place. You know what I mean? Versus just here, sign here, sign here, sign here, and now you have all this debt. Good luck.
Right. Absolutely.
I know there was some schools that got shut down for that. They're predatory lending.
Yes.
And
so
that's
right,
that's
and that's
a scary thing.
Part of the challenge is we really need to vet the schools and the degrees and that kind of stuff. There's a big question out there: is college worth it? And I think that the question needs to be changed as is college worth it for my student? Or the student's asking the question, is it worth it for me? Right? Because there's great examples of, well, if you're going to go on and get your engineering degree or your nursing degree and go get a quality job and off your, launch your career and everything's fantastic. Well, great. Then college is for you, for sure. If you're going to go for 3 years, run up a bunch of debt and then not graduate and then go to work, in retail or something and not make a lot of money, but still have a lot of student loans you have to pay back. Well, that was a mess, right?
Yeah.
And in that situation, college probably wasn't right for you. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's kind of the first step is, some students are very academic and very focused, and they're going to do fantastic almost no matter what they do. Well,
Yeah.
there you go, right? They'll do fantastic. That's an easy situation to deal with. The
Mm-hmm.
other end of the spectrum is the kids that, really need to grow up or, are going to struggle, or they're not academic and they already hate high school, and sending them to college, is not a good fit, and they know it and they're resisting it. And then unless parents force them, which is never a good idea, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to go to college. And that's fine too. There's a lot of other paths to success that don't include college. It's the batch
Yeah.
in the middle where, maybe it's the right path. Maybe maybe not. It might depend. If they get to the right school with the right major, that might be very successful. But if they pick the wrong school or the wrong major, then maybe it won't be as successful. And, those are the ones where a lot of challenge and effort and thought and concern and worry for most
Mm-hmm.
parents. That's where I see that, right? Is of, well, they did okay in high school. They think they want to go work in business, but they're not sure, and they're not sure about their major, and school's kind of expensive.
Mm-hmm.
We put all this money. Are they going to be the one that drops out, or are they going to be the one that buckles down and turns their life around and really goes for it? It's hard to tell right now. Should we take the
Yeah.
risk or not? And I think that really boils down a lot to, can you afford the risk?
Mm.
Right? I mean, if you're saying we're going to take a bunch of debt and this is going to be really scary, and if they don't get a degree to help us pay it back, we're making a disaster, then you probably
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be doing it. Certainly not for the kid where you're not sure, right? If it's the kid that's going to go
Yeah.
off and be very successful, that's a different question, right? There's a lot less risk for the kid that's
Mm-hmm.
always gotten A's and continues to get A's and, thrives in the high school, and he's recommended by all the teachers and everybody loves him. And well, that kid, you take some risk, take on some debt, help him out, and they can pay you back when they graduate. That's a little
Mm-hmm.
different. Again, to where I see a lot of families where, they're saying things like, well, he says he wants to go to college, but if I don't actually sit him down and work with him and help him do all the paperwork and all the essays, and, he probably won't get the applications done. He'll
Mm-hmm.
say he wants to. 6 months later, we'll have that same discussion. He will have done a thing. 6 months later, he'll say he wants to, but he hasn't done a thing. So if we leave it
Mm-hmm.
up to him, it just isn't going to happen. So
Yeah.
then the parents have to decide, should I get involved or should I not?
Yeah.
But I think that's the number one thing, is when people say this is fantastic or this is good or this is what you should do or is it boiled down to, is that what everybody should do? If they're saying it very generically, like, well, you don't know my kid, so how can you know that, right? Well, then it's probably not good advice.
Yeah.
It's, advice that where someone says, I've been in that situation, or I know about that situation, and here's some options that
Mm-hmm.
might be helpful. I think is much better advice, because, the whole idea that everybody should go to college and then college should be free and all these kind of ideas,
Yeah.
they're painting everybody with the same brush, and it's just not
Mm-hmm.
helpful, I think, for most situations.
No, I agree with you. I mean, we had a past guest, Dr. Stephen Poulter, said, we're talking about college, right? He said that a lot of mothers right now are actually writing essays for their kids to get into college and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, well, where do you draw the line to where is this your dream or is it your child's dream, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing all this stuff and it's turning disastrous because the kid is only going to go through the motions just to appease their parents or whatever. I know some parents where they're like, okay, as long as you're going to college, we're going to pay for everything. And the moment you don't go to college, we're taking away everything. You know what I mean? It's like, come on, man. Now you're kind of, strong arming your child there, bro. That's not cool. You know what I mean? The world, my dad had a saying. He said the world needed ditch diggers too, right?
Yes.
And college isn't for everybody, like you said. Same thing like with the line industry that I deal with, right? Not everybody can be a lineman. And that's what I'm seeing nowadays. It's like, man, guide your child, raise your child, help them make wise decisions, but let them make their own decisions. Don't be making decisions for them, right?
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's right. hopefully you've done, when the kids are younger, you need to step in a lot. You got to, you make sure
Yeah.
they get to school when they're in second grade.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe at seventh grade, you stop making sure they get to school and let them deal with the consequences when they show up late and they get a detention.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, well, maybe you should set an alarm and then you wouldn't have to be in detention. So moving through those stages, college is kind of that next stage where if you've done a reasonably good job in some of the earlier stages, college transition is going to be a little bit easier. If you haven't done some of those stages where they can't set their own alarm clock, they've always depended on parents, to get fed, to get to where they need to go to, and all of a sudden they don't have that support, that can be a big challenge. So, again, raising kids through the younger years to be, and again, it applies to wherever they go next, not just college, but just to understand a little more of the world. And we were talking earlier about common sense. Can common sense be taught? But we've all met the people that don't have much, and you kind of wonder how they survive in life. And that's part of the challenge, I think.
Yeah, and it's definitely interesting when I run into people like that, and it's like I could automatically kind of point out like, okay, so this is what they weren't shown or whatever, just because we all know age does not determine maturity at all. I know people that are 45 years old, man, and they still act like a 17-year-old. And I've seen 21-year-old kids that have more emotional maturity than the 45-year-old. You know what I mean? So
right.
It's all about how we raise our children. And I like how you put it. It starts with that foundation from early on, right? If your kids are proving to you that they can handle responsibility, something that we need to train them in, then that's a good indication that, hey, okay, maybe they could handle the responsibility of college too. Let's get them rolling in that direction if that's what they want to do. And I like that you said that. It's all foundation building up to that point, right?
Right, absolutely. And then I think another important step is, is a college degree required for where they want to go, right? So you take a profession like teaching, right? If you want to become a third grade math teacher or a third grade teacher in general, well, you're pretty much going to need an elementary education degree, and you're going to have to go to college to get it. That's, the most obvious path for most people to get to that job. Now, if you want to be a musician, well, what degree do you need for that? Or do you even need a degree, right? If you want to be a rock star kind of musician, you could go to college or not. It probably isn't going to make much difference in your success. If you want to be in the symphony, well, then maybe you need to have some classical training. Maybe not. I don't know enough about the symphony. But a lot of the professions, and when's the last time you hired a professional for something? And it's like, where did you do your undergrad? Really? You went to that college? Oh, well, you can't touch me, doc. You picked the wrong college. I don't want to work with you. Most of us now are, show me what you can do. And if you can do it well, you're the guy for me. So that, graphic design or musician or a lot of businesses and small businesses, especially, they're in some niche and you're looking for that expert. You don't really care how they became the expert. The real question is, can you help me with my problem? If the answer is yes, you're hired. And that, I think, needs to be thought through of, again, if you want to be a nurse, you probably want to need a nursing degree. On the flip side, if you get a nursing degree, your most likely, path is nursing, right? They're very tied together. If you go and get a business degree, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to work in accounting. You're going to be the boss. You're going to be in sales. You're going to be in operations. You're going to be lots of different things you could do with a general business degree as far as where you land next. And then some of the jobs that you might get with a business degree may not even require the degree, right? If you want to, a successful salesperson may or may not have a degree. And certainly sales is not taught in general in college.
Yeah.
And there's probably exceptions. I'm not aware of every college's program, but it's a skill set, I think, that in general is not covered much in college. And a lot of times that's learned on your first job or your summer internship where you sold cell phones or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. School of hard knocks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I found it interesting. You were talking about how, you know, fears that families might have and stuff like that, and different challenges, that come to face families, right? What are some strategies or resources that you can recommend to help navigate through some of the challenges that these families might have with their fears? You know what I mean? As far as, is this kid ready? I mean, what kind of strategies can they put in place?
Yeah. Well, I think the first step, is for everybody to get more educated about how college works and how college is paid for.
Mm-hmm.
Going on college visits and kind of kicking the tires at some of the colleges and learning about the process. And again, colleges, they want students to come,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not, they have their sales teams, they're called admissions, but
Yeah.
it's their job to get the right kids to sign up and show up. And that's how they're judged. Now, hopefully it's the right kids and not just anybody that'll pay the bill. So, you got, buyer beware still applies, just like everywhere else, right? It's not the college's responsibility to verify, what they're selling you is exactly what you need or not. It's your responsibility. And, so a little bit of buyer beware, but in general, colleges, if they can turn out quality graduates that get good jobs, and everybody wins.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where colleges want to be. And you mentioned earlier that there are some colleges out there that got themselves in trouble because they were take advantage of the student aid system, and they were pushing people to get a lot of aid for a degree that wasn't very valuable. And I think that's, part of the vetting process of, well, does it matter if my degree comes from this college or that college?
Mm-hmm.
And in some majors and in some career paths, they're all kind of created equal.
Yeah.
The old joke of, what do they call the guy that graduated last from medical school? Doctor.
Mm. Doctor.
Right? He's still a doctor, even though he was the last in his class. Now, the guy that failed, he's not called doctor, but the guy that graduated last in his class, he's called doctor. When's the last time you said, what was your GPA in medical school? Well, nobody, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't matter as long as you completed the degree in some degrees. And then, what was your quality of service? Last 5 times I came to you, you solved my problems. I'm going to keep coming back, right? Whereas if they can't solve your problems, you stop going. And that's has nothing to do with their degree or where they got their education.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, in some professions, and rightly so, we want high quality. We want to make sure people have the right licenses, have done the right education, and try and vet things and make sure, if you're working in safety or medical fields or that type of stuff, they don't want people that don't know what they're doing, filling those spots if they can help it. So there's always this balance of, that guy with the degree, does he know more than the guy without the degree? Maybe, maybe not. But sometimes it's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm. I know for me, Brad, it was ingrained in us as children. My dad was a blue collar dad, right? He worked, and it was always ingrained in us. I remember him specifically telling me, use your mind, not your back. He'd always tell me that. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up with that in my head, when I grow up, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to go to college. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to go to college. Right. I eventually went to the military because, some unfortunate incidents happened to me. And I went to the military, got out of the military, and then I decided, okay, well, what do I need to do? I'm going to go to college. So I went to one of these predatory lending schools that's no longer around. And I got a 2-year degree, computer networking. And man, I was up to my ears in debt, right? Unfortunately, I didn't have the character or accountability to utilize my GI Bill correctly. So I drank a lot of it away, So I had this debt, right? And unfortunately, I had to deal with it even going into my marriage, because when you marry somebody, that debt's still there. It doesn't go away. You know what I mean? And now your debt becomes their debt, right?
Right.
And I brought that into our marriage and stuff like that. So I had to pay for that. And it sucked. It really did. I wasn't no longer in that career anymore because it kind of got washed out and taken over. And a lot of the businesses I work for were not paying for the certifications that you needed to continue up, like to get a Cisco degree and stuff like that.
Right.
And it sucked, you know what I mean? So I had to make a decision to change my career because I was starting to have my family. I'd gotten married. My daughter had just been born, and I got tired of putting away diapers and checking to see if do I have enough money for diapers or I'm going to keep the lights on this week. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And I had to make a decision, and I went into the line trade, which my family are all linemen, and I did that decision, never looked back since. So that's my experience with the whole college thing. And I think that kind of scares me a little bit with even my own daughter, but like you said, if they're showing you a good track record and, if you can help them navigate the right way to not get themselves in a bind, right? It could go very well with them. But I could see where that stigma would be around, especially for someone that has went through it like that, who started off in college and stuff and then wound up blue collar anyways. You know what I'm saying? Yep. But it's what other stigmas do you see behind colleges like that with fathers and stuff, fears or whatever?
Well, I think there's, the stereotypes of, certain races or whatever that, that's like, well, I had two choices when I grew up. I could either be a doctor or a lawyer, right? I mean, there's some parents that are just, that's the only definition of success, right? You have to do these things. So I see a lot of families on the one end of the spectrum are like, well, we got to get the kid in the right kindergarten so we can get him in the right grade school, so we can get him in the right middle schools, so we can get him in the right high school, so they can get in the right college, and then they'll have a great, successful life. And that's just a lot of pressure and a lot of, challenge, I think, for most kids. For a few kids, that's a great path. Right? Yeah. But for a lot of kids, it's like, well, they don't, will that get them where they're going? Who knows? Right? Because when you talk to a lot of, people out there in general, a lot of them have that, as like what you mentioned, they have that sharp left turn in their career path that they didn't see coming, right? I have an engineering degree, and here I am talking about college planning. Now, do I regret my engineering degree? No, it taught me a lot of numbers and how to do a lot of planning. And, so I took my problem solving skills and shifted them into college planning. And it was a great path for me. But if someone said, how do you become a college planner? I'm not sending them to engineering school. That's the way I did it. It's not the way someone else is going to do it. Right. So that's, I think the other piece of it, right, is people will find their paths and, some will have a tougher time and some will, go straight through. Right. I have 3 kids. My youngest is 17 now and my oldest is 21, just turned 21. So I've got 2 in college and they're all different. Right. My oldest has been very academic, very math and science. He's on his way to an engineering degree. The next one's interested in physical therapy. And then my youngest, who's in high school, has no clue what she wants to be when she grows up. And it's starting to become a challenge, right? Because should be visiting colleges and trying to figure out where she's going to go and kind of plan her life, so to speak, and what she wants to do when she grows up. And it's hard because she's very undecided. And I think that's another big challenge that families have. If parents were undecided and had that varied career path and stuff, they're much more forgiving and saying, well, they don't know, but they'll figure it out. If parents, however, were that type of kid where they said, I went to school for this, I studied that, I got that career, I've been in that career. It was so, it was a nice straight line and so easy and obvious. And then if their kids are like, well, we don't know, it's like, well, just pick one. We need to know where we need to know your path so we can get you. And it brings the whole process to a grinding halt sometimes when a student says, well, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So now we can't visit colleges. We can't choose degrees. We can't choose majors. We can't. And what are we going to do? And, you know, so, and the right answer there, I think, is you're going to do something to help get unstuck, or be okay with going to college undecided.
Yeah.
There are some colleges that's their thing. That's who they want, is the kids that are undecided. So, so there's lots of that and kind of that big picture stuff.
Yeah.
Then on the
and
other
I
side
could relate with that. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
On the other side of it, we've been talking a lot about big picture stuff. Then there's a lot of tactics and strategies that families can use to help with the cost of college, right? So if college, the average state school is about $27,000, the average private school is $57,000, and that's total cost for 1 year, and that's tuition, room and board, books, fees, beer and pizza. The whole average cost for college, which is very expensive, but that's list price. From there, we get some money off. We get our need-based aid, merit aid, sometimes loans, scholarships, all these different pieces that can bring that cost down. And now we're looking at a net cost, right? So some families, the net cost of college could be $10,000. For some families, it could be 20 or 25, depending on where mom and dad's income is probably the biggest determination of that. Mom and dad's income and mom and dad's assets kind of determine that. And then from there, you could go to a more expensive college, right? There are opportunities to spend $60,000 a year on college, or even $90,000 a year on college. I'm not saying you should, I'm saying you could.
Yeah.
And, some families that have that kind of money will happily spend it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just like when we're driving down the highway, we look over and we see that really expensive sports car and we go, wow, that's a waste of money. Well, the guy driving it doesn't think it was a waste of money. He bought it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's one person's opinion versus another person's opinion. There's no right or wrong amount to spend on a car.
Yeah.
I think there's a right or wrong for you, depending on what the rest of your budget looks like. Right. So that's the other thought process, is how much can we afford to spend on college? And if you're going to give up the lake home in order to spend crazy amounts of money on college, that's a lot different decision than saying we're going to blow up our finances. We're going to have a bunch of debt that we won't be able to pay back in order to pay too much for college. That's a completely different situation. And then no matter what you do, if you use the good strategies and good tactics around financial planning and college planning, you could save 10 or 20% on college by choosing the right loans and getting the right scholarships, picking the right schools and filling out the right applications the right way. And all of a sudden you get more aid, or you get lower interest rates, and you save. So your overall out-of-pocket cost for college goes down because you did it wisely. Well, that makes sense for everybody. You can do the same thing when you buy a vehicle, right? Some people just walk into the car dealership and say, I'll take the blue one, and they write a check. Other people do all kinds of shopping and test driving and say, well, do I need this car or that car? And they put a lot of analysis into it, and then maybe they don't write as big of a check. But more likely they're going to be happy with the car, right? They're less likely to have to take it back. They're less likely of overpaying because they've done all of that legwork. Some people just don't care. We see the same thing in college where people just say, I don't care what it costs. I'll just stumble through it and I'll pay whatever it costs. And I didn't even realize there was a better deal at a school across the street. I just didn't even look. And other people are going to do all kinds of analysis, all kinds of planning. And and for the listeners out there, right, who you are, right? If you spend 7 Saturdays to buy a car versus, you wake up one morning and say, oh, I think I need a new car. And by noon, you've got a new car. You're the other side of it where you don't do as much analysis. But I think those types of things are also what needs to be thought about. Of if you're going to do the process and do it well, it's going to take a lot of time and effort. And I've got a lot of resources on my website to help with all that. What are the strategies and the tactics? If you do this, you'll get more aid. If you do this, you can find better schools. Or here's a list that you can use, or here's a calculator that will help you figure out financial aid. All of that stuff, needs to be done no matter what level of college you go to, and no matter whether it's, a good idea or not from a student's perspective.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. You talked a lot about support, right? Like, that's going to take a lot of support from both mother and father, right? If you're fortunate enough to have both. With that being said, Brad, what advice can you give to fathers so they don't feel intimidated about supporting their children's educational aspirations, especially if they themselves, didn't have the opportunity to pursue that higher education themselves? Like, what advice can you give them?
Yeah. So I get, some people that hire me to help with the college planning. Along those lines are kind of two groups, parents that just didn't go to college at all. And then there's the other group of parents that went to college in some other country. So they're like, well, I did my studying elsewhere, so I don't know how the American system works. And since we're here in the U.S. now, we have to learn the new system for our kids. So I think that's part of the process too, is, learning enough, getting a mentor perhaps that does understand the college process, right? So sometimes there's a brother or sister of the, so it'd be an aunt or uncle of the student that might have been to college, and they can step in and help a little bit more and explain some things. And, or you can literally go hire the professionals that can coach the student and can coach the parents on various aspects, right? So I tend to work with parents, and we do a lot on the money side of things, as far as how to save and invest and plan and fill out forms and financial aid and all that kind of stuff. There are experts out there that help students figure out what they want to be when they grow up, help them write essays, help them, find a career path that's a good fit for their personality, and all that type of thing. And it could, for a lot of families, college is so expensive that it could be money well spent, to make sure you're picking a path that at least has a chance of being the one the student really wants. Because 25 years ago when I went to college, or that's 35 years ago when I went to college, I'm getting old now. It wasn't unusual to run into that kid that changed their major 3 times, and they've already been there 6 years, and they're saying things like, well, I'll graduate in another year and a half. And I was like, 7.5 years to graduate? That, but they changed their major. They didn't know what they wanted to do. And college wasn't that expensive, so it wasn't that terrible that they spent so much time there. What the prices is today, that sounds like a nightmare to most parents. To pay extra years of college at tens of thousands of dollars doesn't make a lot of sense. So now there's a lot more pressure to get it right the first time. Yeah. And do it as efficiently as we can. Rightly so, because it's so expensive. But it also, that pressure gives that new dynamic for especially the kids that are undecided, or when mom and dad don't quite know what's going on. As far as, because they don't have enough experience on their own. So you can, like I said, you can hire someone. You can, I've got a podcast with 150 episodes where you can just start listening and learning. You can, lots of different ways to get a little more up to speed. But then also just having that communication about, well, are you do you have a chip on your shoulder for or against college? I mean, I've run into those parents, right, where my kid wants to go, but it's such a waste of money. Why would he ever do that? It's like, well, with that attitude, I don't know that I can convince you, because you've already decided college is a scam, right? You've got, when you're on the internet, oh, they indoctrinated my kid with these ideas. Well, I don't want to send my kids to be indoctrinated. Nobody does. Is that reality? A little, maybe at some schools, but most kids can think for themselves, and
hopefully,
right. And that's not a big issue, but maybe it is. I don't know. But again, for many students, college is a path that's almost required to get to where they think they want to go.
Yeah.
So as parents, we need to support it where we can and help where we can. And again, sometimes it's, we'll help the student borrow money. We don't have, we can't give them the money. And other times it's, we have money set aside. So, it wasn't unusual for me to have a family that says, well, our budget is $100,000 per child. Unfortunately, the schools are looking at are $200,000. So now what?
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, you can probably find schools that would work out for $100,000. Is it worth it to spend another 100 or have the student borrow another 100? Maybe, depending on the school, depending on the major, depending on the career path. So there's not an automatic, well, that's always good or always bad. There's many shades of gray.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of factors that are involved with this decision making, right?
Yes.
I think it was interesting that you talked about how some parents are like anti-college, indoctrination and stuff like that. I even hear that even at a lower level as far as whether or not to take your kids and put them in public school versus, a private school, or a charter school. And I'm always asked the question, Brad, what do you think about that? And it's like, if you're relying on this private school, and let's say a private Christian school, okay? If you're relying on this private Christian school to instill the morals, values, personal responsibility, and self-control that we are, as fathers, responsible for and instilling in our children to build that character and raise them to maturity, if you're relying on that school to do that, you need to seriously reassess your fathering. Because like you said, I caught it when you're talking, if you're worried about your kid being indoctrinated, what kind of fathering did you do to your kid? They should be able to stand up for right. They should be able to have these morals and values that you instilled in them, to see through the bull crap if it's going to happen, right? Because you can't put your kid in a bubble their whole entire life, right? They're going to run into this is the world. This is the way it's going, But if you're relying and you're wanting to put yourself in debt and all these different private schools, charter schools, stuff like that, and then you complain that, hey, man, I spent all this money on my kids. I did this for them, and they still turned out this way. It's like, man, you're missing the point, brother. You should have been doing that at your house.
Right.
It kind of blows my mind, honestly.
Right. Exactly. And even right. And that's the challenge, I guess, is there's a lot of work that could be done around just educating our kids.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of work that could be around, the sports and activities they get involved in. And there's a lot of work that could be involved in their college planning. And then, of course, we got to raise the money to cover all this stuff. So there's a lot of work to be done to raise, to earn a living, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And I think, another factor to think about is college is paid for with money, of course, but also time and stress.
Yes.
Right. So the process, for some people that don't have as much money, they can put more time into it and find the better deals, find the scholarships, find the ways to keep the cost down. For some people where they don't have the time, then they can just write the check. That works too. And then there's the third category, which is the stress around, some kids thrive on the competition and really want to go for it and want to shoot for the moon and go for those very competitive schools. And other kids don't want that kind of pressure. And they would just rather go someplace that's a little more laid back and not so competitive and not get into the rat race if they don't have to. And knowing, what you're looking for and figuring that out is worthwhile. But it takes time and effort. And then that same philosophy, that's college, can be applied to high school. Should they go to a private high school? Is there one that's reasonably available? Should we check it out? Should we spend the time?
Mm-hmm.
My oldest, who was the academic, went to a private high school because he thrived. It was a great decision for him.
Mm-hmm.
His brother, who was 1 year behind him, when we started talking to him about, well, you want to go where your brother's going? He's like, no way. He does homework all the time. Why would I want to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Meet my friends and do a bunch of homework? No, I'll go with my friends to the local public school. And that was a great fit for him. So I think that's the, again, part of the process of finding what's the good fit, and and it can be an overwhelming constant demand of, okay, well, now do I, if you had a kid that played baseball, it's like, do I need to hire a batting coach and a pitching coach and do I want to get that involved? Is that important? Or can he just go to the park and play baseball on Saturday morning? Mm-hmm. Both of those work where you put your time and effort and money, kind of that same process around all areas. But
yeah,
I see a lot of parents that are very, get the kids involved in all kinds of stuff and drag them everywhere and have them join a bunch of stuff and get them involved. Mm-hmm. And for the right kid, that's maybe the right path. But for other kids, other paths work too. So
yeah,
if we knew what the magic bullets were, we would let everyone know. But that's the challenge. Yeah. Is what works for some doesn't work for others.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, even with the sports, like you're saying, I have friends that put their kids in so many different sports. I mean, they're all over the place. And it's like, man, well, the chances of your kid getting a D1 scholarship are slim to none, brother. But you're just beating these kids down. I mean, you look at these kids and they haven't slept. They're tired. They're whiny. They're hungry. And it's like, no, we got to go. We got to go to your next club ball game or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, do you realize what you're doing to your kids? Right. It's crazy. You know what I mean? And there is kids that thrive on that, like you said too, Right.
There's some kids that want to do it, and I've talked to those parents, right?
Yeah.
It's like I keep telling them to drop out of a couple things. They're so busy, but they won't or can't or don't want to, or then they seem to thrive and they're doing well. So, maybe I let it go. That's the way they roll. Right. I think what happens is if the kid's not into it and the parents are pushing something that's not, but the kids consider important, that's when the challenges start happening, where the kid feels the pressure to participate in the sport because dad wants the athlete.
Yeah.
That dad was never able to be himself, or potentially, or whatever that is. Right. Mm-hmm. A lot of parents live through their children.
Yep.
And that's their job and their goal of, making sure that their kids have all the opportunities and and I think that changes a lot when you have larger families, right? When you have 4 or 5 kids, it gets to be physically impossible to show up to every game for every kid every time.
Yeah.
You start having to say, yeah, you're going to go play baseball with your team, and I'm not going to be there because I'm going to go to your sister's volleyball game this time. Mm-hmm. And, and most kids are just fine with it, right? If that's the way life is, it works just fine. But I've seen a lot of parents that feel the pressure of, well, I got to go to everything and be involved and cheer on my kid. And it's like, no, you don't. Especially, and again, 2nd grade, maybe you got to be the driver and you got to get it all organized and supervise and some of that kind of stuff. And maybe you have to be the coach. But when they're a junior in high school, all of a sudden, maybe you don't have to. You can if you want to, but there's a lot of kind of preconceived, this is the way it should be. And if you're not doing it that way, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. I know for us, for my wife and I, we chose, because we have a 7-year age gap between my daughter, who's graduating now, and my middle son. Mm-hmm. And for us, it was like, do we want to really put on that stress on the kids to where we're going both places? I mean, my daughter, she cheerleaded for a major high school here in Southern California. All their games were televised. They're one of the number 1 public school football teams in the nation, right? Like Texas football ain't got nothing on Southern California football. Okay. So with that being said, it's a busy schedule. She's cheerleading, she's at these games, she's all over the place, right? And we made the conscious decision to be like, okay, we'll wait for our kids we'll wait. This is Dakota's year. This is her senior year. We're gonna allow Dakota to do what she needs to do. We'll support her 100%, be wherever she needs to be. And then when she's done, we'll focus on the two boys. You know what I mean? And so far it's been working pretty great because, I mean, just even thinking about, okay, what are we going to do for the boys? Are they going to be in wrestling? Are they going to be in this, that, whatever, this sport? How are we going to do it? You know, what about your job? You're all over the place, David. You know what I mean? All this different stuff is already starting to build up all this different pressure. I'm like, hold on. Wait, let's think about this. Let's just focus on our one daughter right now. Let her have a great high school ending, go out with a bash, and then we'll focus on the boys, you know? So you're absolutely right. It makes you got to make a conscious decision on what you're going to do. Choose your heart, I guess. Right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
No, but, wanted to ask you, Brad, for fathers out there and their families, right, that ensure that their children are aware of the various career paths that are available to them, right, including those in the trades and skilled labor and industries. Are there any resources or organizations that can help expose them to these opportunities that you know of, as far as like apprenticeships or anything like that?
Yeah, it's probably state by state, but I know here in Wisconsin, there's been a big push in the high schools now to make the students college and career ready. So they have resources and workshops, and they certainly have the college fairs and all that stuff, but they also have the opportunities to learn about the military, to learn about apprenticeships, to learn about local business, and a lot of other things as well. There's been an intentional shift away from, well, we're just going to, everybody here, it's college prep now. And there's some private schools, especially, and also some communities where a vast majority of the kids are going off to college. And if it's a good fit for the vast majority, that's great. Because a lot of times, again, some of the high schools out there, that's their mandate, right? We're college prep high school. So if you're not thinking about college when you graduate, then maybe we're not a good fit for you. And you go sit somewhere else. Yeah. But I think that can be same said for, if you don't think you want college or you want to explore other options. Certainly there's a lot of resources out there. I know in our state, right at the high school, there's resources, and through the Department of Education and other resources. What's available in each state, it's one of those things where you just have to ask around and see what you can learn and kind of go from there.
Yeah, for sure. No, I know that even with the veterans now, they've started this VEEP program, right? To where veterans are now starting to utilize their GI Bill into getting into some of the trades out there, like the electrical industry and stuff like that. And I think it's a pretty good program to expose them to the line industry for so long, like with linemen in our industry, right? The only way you got into it is if you knew somebody or you related somebody in the line trade. It was very, very clandestine, real small community, right? Now, you got veterans that are getting the opportunity through this VEEP program to come into the industry and stuff like that. So there's definitely a lot more exposure for the trades, I see. And I think that's a good thing. Not everybody was designed for college, like you said. And like, I agree. And not everybody's designed for the trades. And that's why there's college, right? So, I think it's a good thing. I think the major takeaway from all this is, as a parent, are you putting in the work? Are you understanding your kids' strengths and weaknesses? Are you helping them develop into mature adults to make wise decisions? And are you going to support those decisions? At the end of the day, it's a choice, right? So, but Brad, how can someone reach you? Can you please share with our audience about how to get your book and all that stuff? I just want to give you this opportunity to do that right now.
Yeah. So everything we do is at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. So that's the name of the podcast. So wherever podcasts are sold. You can, grab your podcast there. Obviously mine's free, but all the podcast apps will have access to it. And then we also have things like financial aid calculator, scholarship guide for busy parents, a number of other resources, and a blog and a free e-newsletter where if you want to sign up for that. And then ultimately, if you want to reach out to us, there's phone numbers there. You can just give us a call and, or send us an email, and we'd be happy to chat.
Awesome. We'll put it also on the show notes. Thank you once again, Brad, for coming on our show and just sharing your expertise on breaking the stigma around college. It was very, very informative, and I thank you, man. I thank you for what you're doing, for sure.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And for you guys listening, we just want to thank you guys for being a part of this great broadcast. Once again, if you guys want to find out more information on what we do, we encourage you to go to the showupdadfoundation.org. Hit us up, check out our website, check out our merch, support us. Thank you.